Welcome to the worst nightmare of all. Reality.
Explore the lesser-known stories of our unknown world. Join the pursuit of the paranormal with Ash and Greg.
Welcome to this week's episode. Today we are joined by Mike Covell, a UK-based paranormal researcher and investigator who's written over 30 books, I believe. So quite a well-versed investigator into all different aspects of the paranormal. So thank you, Mike. Thank you for chatting to us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So we start most interviews with just a bit of like what you call an origin story. So what was it that got you involved in the paranormal?
So when I was 8, I lived on the same street that I'm on now, a couple of doors that way. And I was in bed one night and I just saw this bright light illuminate my bedroom. And my initial thought as an 8-year-old boy was burglars. So I went to the window to look out for these burglars, and there was no one in the street. The street was deserted. And it was then in the sky, I just saw this big egg. And it was just there in the sky. And it was bright white. It had like a red and a green light on it. And it just stayed there silently. And I just felt overcome with this great sense of calm. It was almost like an inner voice was saying, just chill, go to bed, just ignore it. And I went to bed. The next morning, I got up for breakfast. The first thing I said to my dad was, you won't believe what I saw last night. We started talking about it. And instead of my dad saying, don't be daft, or him saying, oh, it was probably on an air balloon or a blimp or an helicopter, he went upstairs and he came back down with this big folder, and it was called Unexplained, and it was like a Partworks magazine that he used to collect back in sort of the 70s and 80s.
Cool.
And it just banged it down on the table and said to me, read that. And I read it cover to cover. And went right through his library and read them all within the space of a few days, and that was it. I was hooked. And I mean, in there it had stuff on UFOs, ghosts, cryptids, unsolved crimes. So that for me was my eureka moment. That was when it really woke me up. And then through the years, like my dad would say at Christmas, "What do you want for Christmas?" And like most kids would say, a skateboard or Action Man or whatever. And as a kid, it was always UFO books, ghost books, UFO videos. And we subscribed to UFO magazine and 14 Times magazine, and we just built up this massive collection. And you can't see it because it's dark, but it's in the office. We built up a massive collection of magazines, newspapers, clippings, all sorts. And sort of, I eventually joined Hull UFO Society.
Right, I'll come back to that in a minute.
All right, yeah. So that was basically where it all started for me, and grew from there, really.
So it's quite interesting. Like your dad was sort of, well, probably like sort of the main instigator in you being open to it all. Because, like, say, like when you thought he'd just like sort of tell you, oh, it's nothing, which is what you'd be hearing most of the time, especially at that young age. So maybe wait to be a bit older before they sort of say, oh, it could be. But to be that young and to be thrown into it like that, that's just pretty awesome, pretty unique as well, I think.
Yeah, I was quite blessed because my dad was quite open and interested, whereas my mum was quite closed and skeptical. So to be brought up like that with those two conflicting was great for me, because when it got brought up at the dinner table, we'd have this big discussion on what it could be. And my mum had experienced stuff, but she was quite close to it. And it was only in later years that she became quite open to it. She rang me up one night and she said, there's a light in the sky and I don't know what it is. And I was on flight radar trying to find out what it was. And I said, there's no satellites, there's no lunar anomalies, there's nothing going on in space, there's no flights, which means it's unexplained, Mum. And she was on the phone real quiet and she was like, I guess you're right. And then that was her epiphany moment. Then when she kind of, but yeah, it was really weird growing up because we would discuss it quite openly. I remember going to the library and getting books on things like the Loch Ness Monster and Lake Monsters, and just sitting there with my dad. And I would read them, and then he would read them, and then we'd have this discussion. We'd sit openly and talk about it. Awesome. And it was wonderful because mean, that continued right up until the day he died. We would talk about, you know, UFOs and ghosts and all sorts together.
Yeah, that is refreshing to hear, because like a lot of the people we speak to, it never gets mentioned in the family. It's just, I mentioned it and it's never either never talked about, or they're like, no, don't be silly. So yeah, that, and then like you say, to be able to have the discussion on the books that you both read, that's got to be pretty cool.
Oh, it was fantastic. Things like we'd talk about things like Roswell, Rendlesham, various lake monsters around the world. I know my dad had a collection of books on Irish lake monsters and stuff like that. So we'd talk about them. One of my fondest memories is being laid on the living room floor, eating a salt and vinegar crisp sandwich in this big book on Loch Ness. And every now and again, I'd turn around to my dad and go, "You'd never guess this," and just giving him little factoids and stuff, and he'd just sit there nodding his head, and then, you know, just wonderful memories like that of coming up in that kind of environment. You know,
were you both on the same page in terms of what you? So did you have a discussion about what you thought UFOs were at that point?
oh yeah, definitely. He was of the belief that there is something out there that is unknown. Either certain people like the government know about it, or they've investigated it, or they've looked into it. He was certain. He did a lot of work with the Ministry of Defence. He had to sign the Official Secrets Act. He worked on nuclear submarines. He worked in the Rock of Gibraltar. So he sort of said to me, "I know there are secrets," you know, and he knew that from firsthand from all the stuff that he had to do. And for years, he used to travel all over the world with his job, working on all these sensitive military sites. And for years, I thought it was like in the SAS or something like this. Turns out it was just an industrial cleaner who would go on site and clean stuff. But as a kid growing up, he was in Gibraltar when the IRA and the SAS got into a street battle and stuff like that. And, you know, as a kid, I was like, and he was always real quite secretive about his work, purely because it was boring, you know. But I remember he was in Gibraltar when they filmed one of the James Bond films, and he was really excited about that. And he was like, you know, we're working on the Rock, and the army are there, and we're filming, and, you know, and it was when he passed away, we got the Official Secrets Act was delivered back to us with his signature on and stuff like that, giving us a list of all the things he'd done. And he'd worked at some wonderful sites. And I remember over the years he'd kind of let slip a little bit. You know, I was up in Scotland, and I kept thinking, well, what's up in Scotland? And it was where all the nuclear bases were with all the submarines and stuff. And it was on it. He got a letter one day about nuclear radiation, and it said all your team have been tested, and you're the only person that's not been contaminated. And I was like, Dad, why? And he was like, oh, just ignore it, you know. And so I knew there was like a backstory there, but I wasn't quite sure. So he knew from experience that there were secrets, and whether they were there to protect us or for something else. But so we had a lot of discussions about, you know, there is stuff that is known, and there's stuff that is unknown, but maybe it is known, but we just don't know about it, and that kind of thing. And we'd have these late conversations, and we'd talk about UFOs and as from space. We'd talk about the idea of aliens, and we'd talk about UFOs as technology that we've not yet seen, or foreign technologies, and we'd just have these wonderful discussions, and, you know, and that lasted for years, and yeah, it was wonderful.
That's amazing. I suppose that set you up for what you've done in the years since, and the whole, I guess, the amount of years and work that you put into the whole subject stems from that, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that he did say to me very early on was, if you're researching, always try and find proof. Always try and find sources and references and things like that. So that kind of became what I do. You know, I go to the archives and spend time in the archives and look for the newspaper reports and the eyewitness sightings, and go to the National Archives and stuff like that. So that really did carry on for many, many years. And it was all, whenever I went to the archives, the first person that I would see when I got back home, I would pop and see my dad. We'd have a cup of tea, and I'd put all the files down on the table, and we'd sit and read them together, and we'd discuss them. And, you know, so it was wonderful to have that kind of relationship with him. And I mean, he passed away in 2010. The day he passed away, I was on the way to speak at the Jack the Ripper conference. and I got a telephone call saying your dad's just passed away. I was on the train at the time, and my mum just said, "Go, carry on, go and do it because that's what he enjoyed you doing, that's what he loved you doing, and he knew you was passionate. So go and do it." So I remember I went and spoke in London for the weekend, and the whole thing was just a blur. But I went and did it, and then I'm glad I did do it because I have wonderful memories from it, and it opened up a lot of doors for me. And then I came back to Hull and dealt with all that when I got back. But yeah, he was really into all that kind of weird stuff, and yeah, it was wonderful.
So you had your experience when you were 8, and you sort of got into it from then. And you mentioned the whole UFO Society. What happened? So what's the next stage of your story, I guess?
So as a teenager, the next real big thing to happen was a TV show called The X-Files. When that came on in the 90s, that was kind of the up until that point, people used to think that what I did was weird. And then overnight it became like, this is the kid that knows this kind of stuff, and I had a group of friends, and we would sit in a little clubhouse that we had built at the bottom of a friend's garden, and we'd read through UFO magazine and 14 Times, and we'd take we'd text Eric von Daniken books and all this kind of stuff, and we'd just sit and read and discuss and debate, and it was like, wow, it'd be cool if there was a club. And then I remember one day my dad was like, there's a UFO society starting up in Hull. I remember it was in West Hull, which is like the complete opposite end of the city, which to me is like going to the ends of the earth. It's like totally foreign at that side of the city. And my dad was like, you need to go and meet these guys. And I remember calling up Chris Evers and saying, can you give me a little bit more info? I'm really wanting to come down. And I went, and it was in a church hall, which I thought was weird because we're kind of talking about the opposite end of the spectrum, and I remember just this great feeling of meeting like-minded individuals that we were all on that same wavelength. I mean, obviously to varying degrees. There were some people that were at the far end where everything's paranormal and everything's a conspiracy, and then there were more like sort of down to earth, grounded people that wanted the facts and things. And I remember meeting people there that are still good friends to this day. And I mean, that was back in the 90s. I was just a teenager at the time. And obviously me and Chris met at that point. I became really good friends with him, and we stayed in touch. So that was a big thing for me, and it was weird because up until that point we'd been doing it with just either myself, my dad, or a couple of my friends. This opened up a door of hundreds of people wanting to do sky watches with you and stuff like that, and it was great. Yeah. Up until that point, we used to sleep on my mate's shed roof with binoculars and and a flask, looking for stars on a night and trying to find UFOs and stuff like that. And now we had all these people wanting to do it, and then we realised that we were part of a network. So we were dealing with the British UFO Research Association, all these different organisations and societies were part of these massive nationwide network, and it was great because it opened up a lot of doors. But then life kind of took over, and I mean, I had to go through college and stuff. I was at college for 3 years. I left college and got like a job and all that kind of stuff. But that interest was always there. So, for example, at one point, I left Hull to go work in West Yorkshire, and the pub where I worked was supposedly haunted. So when everyone had gone home on a night, we'd go down in the bar and we'd get a table out and a glass and try and make contact. And there were stories of local witches, so we'd go to the local forest and try and find them. And it was quite naive back then. I remember at one point, I used to come home on a weekend to see my mum and dad. And I remember getting home one weekend, and the church right near the pub had been daubed in satanic messages and stuff like that. And I remember my dad just kind of saying in a throwaway remark, "Weren't you there earlier?" And I'd passed that very church, and it was clean. So somewhere between me passing and coming home, someone had daubed it in satanic messages. And so there was always that kind of going on. And I continued collecting the magazines and the newspaper clippings and stuff like that during that period. And then I met my wife, I got married, we had children, I got a mortgage. And then 16 years ago, I was diagnosed with a critical heart condition. And I was told I had to give up my job. And my GP basically said to me, get a hobby. So I went back to the paranormal and started reading all the books again. And one element of that was local history. I always loved local history. And I wanted to know more about Hull in East Yorkshire. And I realised quite early on that a lot of the questions I had about our region had never been written about before. They'd never been discussed. So I wanted to, I wanted to write a book on local UFO sightings and stuff like that. I wanted to write a book on local ghost reports. So that was it really. I started writing just between sort of appointments. I had an art operation. It sort of messed up a little bit. It didn't go as planned. So I was ill again. So I continued writing and stuff like that. I had a second art operation. I was given the all clear. And I applied back for the type of jobs that I'd been doing all my life. But if you've got an existing heart condition, no one wants to take you on because of potentially the insurance policies and the risk. So I set up my own company where I would be researching and writing and selling my articles to magazines and newspapers and so on. I wanted to publish my books. I wanted to run tours and lectures and teach. And it just blew up from there. And I've never looked back. And it's now a full-time job. Today I was at a house blessing. This weekend I've got ghost walks. I've got paranormal investigation. I'm even going to a 15th century manor house which is supposedly haunted by a cow. So it's just a full-time thing for me at the moment. So
that's amazing. What a dream job.
Yeah.
What tells me about the cow?
Yeah.
So, haunted by a cow.
We're going to it's basically it was a manor house that was built in the 1500s. And apparently back then it was quite commonplace to build a strategic defensive tower. So that if ruffians came, you could go up and shoot them with bows and arrows and all that crap. And then the manor house collapsed. The tower remains. And in I believe it was 1810, a cow got into this tower, walked up the spiral staircase, got to the roof and realised it couldn't walk back down, so just jumped off the roof and died. And since then, people have reported hearing this phantom mooing and people get pushed up the stairs and all this kind of stuff. So we've arranged for a site visit. It very rarely opens to the public. And a friend of mine was passing when the owner was there and basically said to the owner, would you mind if we come and have a look around properly? And the owner was like, yeah, sure. And so we're going on Saturday morning to have a look at that. Apparently we need climbing gear. We've got to take ladders and all sorts. So it should be a fun morning out.
Wow. I just want to go back to the whole UFO society, because the reason I made a comment a little bit earlier was, so me and Ash have been doing a podcast for a year and a half, nearly 2 years now. And guests of ours appear to have kind of weird connections to us, or us to them, or me to Ash. So me and Ash we've got some weird connections with like MPs and all this kind of stuff. We've interviewed people in America and they live in towns that are the same as the next town to me, where I live in Oxfordshire. And so it was about 20 years ago. So I've been into UFOs and then I moved into the paranormal myself. But about 20 years ago, I was reading UFO magazine. A DVD of this guy came out, and I can't for the life of me remember it now. However, there was an article, and I think it was about the whole UFO society. And I literally started communicating with somebody at the whole UFO society. And I was going to come up, and me and my girlfriend then, she's now my wife, we were going to come up and spend a weekend and go sky watching at the whole UFO society. And I live down in Oxfordshire, so I'm nowhere near Hull at all. So for you to come on and then talk about the whole UFO society, how much is that?
Yeah, I mean, they were massive back in the day. They used to write, the group members would write for UFO magazine. Mm-hmm. So I know there was Sean, and his wife. They used to write stuff for UFO, for UFO magazine. They had their own little magazine published as well that went out to the members. But yeah, it was really interesting because, like now when I go to conferences and stuff, I bump into people that were members. I was lecturing the other day in a pub, and the lady that had booked me, we realised that we were connected through the Beast of Barmston Drain story, because I'd when that story blew up in 2015, a local rock group made a rock operetta about the story, and she was there the night they performed it. So we were all in this room together, and then a couple of years later, Travel Channel came to Hull and they filmed a documentary about it. And the night they shot it, we needed to fill a pub up with our friends and friends of friends, and she was there that night in the same room. And then she owns a pub now, and she booked me to lecture. And it was only when I started talking, she was like, I was there that night. And then as we got chatting, she was like, I was at Hull UFO Society. And I was like, Lonsdale Centre. And straight away, she was like, yeah, I was there that night. So 3 times in our life, we've been in the same room and just not interacted with each other, but we've both been there for the same reason. And now we've made that connection. And so, yeah, that was really strange.
But considering I've never been to Hull, I probably 5 or 6 hour drive away, and we were organising to go up and stay with this. I can't remember the guy's name, and because I was using an old Vodafone email address because I worked at Vodafone, and then they cut the Vodafone emails and just sort of like disbanded it all. So I lost all the emails, but I can't remember what his name was.
Yeah, it was really weird because the society just kind of separated, and I do remember there was quite a lot of ill feeling at one point between certain groups and stuff like that. So I just kind of backed away at that point because I had a lot of stuff going on with college and my A levels and all that kind of stuff. And then I can't even remember what happened, but I bumped into Chris, and we just got chatting again about UFOs, and he was like, he's still interested, and I was like, yeah, and he added me on Facebook, and we try and help each other out. So when he was writing Outer Limits magazine, I would offer him articles and stuff like that. When he was looking for work, I would say, do you want to come and appear at one of my nights, and we'll get you on the stage and stuff like that. So we just help each other out here, there, and everywhere. And it was the same with research. I know some of the stories that he was researching, he was missing bits of the puzzle, whereas I had bits of the puzzle, and I would say to him, well, I'll tell you what, I'll give you this if you give me that. And so we'd swap and help each other out. And we've been mates for years now, since the 90s. We talk quite regularly, and yeah, it's amazing how many people. And we get tea delivered to the front door from Rington's Tea, and the Rington's Tea man pulled up one day and he was like, "You're Mike?" And I was like, yeah. And he was like, Hull UFO Society. And he was at Hull UFO Society that night as well. So it just goes to show like how far reaching it was back in the day.
Crazy world. Yeah. That's crazy. So after the age of 8, and you've gone through this journey of researching and obviously a lot of this was pre-internet as well. Ash, you might not remember those days. I do
just
those
about.
days. Have you had any other UFO experiences?
Oh yeah, one of the weirdest ones, because I talked to Sasha Christie recently about this, because I'd had this experience where I was with my friend Matt. Matt was my best friend right through school. He was my best man when I got married, but he was my sky watching buddy. He had a big garden with a big shed with a flat roof, so that was our spot. So on a night we'd go out sky watching together. We'd take a flask and various cameras and stuff like that, and we'd just sit up on his shed roof. So we didn't disturb his family. We'd put a tarpaulin over the clothesline in the garden, and we'd sleep under that. And we'd keep the dog outside, and the dog would just crawl underneath with us. And for years and years we did that together. We were really good friends. And I remember one night we were stood in the street, and what would happen was maybe 3-4 o'clock in the morning, I'd say, right, I've had enough, I'm going home. And he'd walk me through the house so as not to disturb anyone. And we'd stand on the front doorstep, and we'd say, right, when should we do it again? Have you got any plans tomorrow or next weekend or whatever? So we'd always have these little conversations before we separated for the night. And I remember standing on his doorstep, and overhead flew a big black triangle, and it shot overhead. And we both looked up at it and just went, "All right, see you later," and went home. And that night, I went to bed, no worries. I got up in the morning, and I thought, did I dream that? Why didn't we react to that? Because we'd seen it. And it was maybe 3 or 4 days later. I used to go to the gym with Matt, so we'd go training together and stuff like that. And then one day he just said, "You know what? I had a really weird dream the other night after we'd been sky watching." So I said, "What was it?" And he said, "Oh, this big black triangle flew overhead." And I was like, "Right, we were stood on your doorstep and it flew west." And he went, "Yeah." And I went, "Well, I had the same dream." And he was like, "Is that possible?" And I was like, "So if it wasn't a dream and we were awake, why didn't we react to that?" It was just so bizarre. Like, it was before I went home, so it can't have been a dream. But it was just so weird. All down to the latest one, which was we go to Whitby a lot, and we do wild camping. So we don't have a campsite. We basically go and find these legal spots where you can wild camp for the night. And more often than not, they're deserted because most people want those amenities of a toilet and a shower. Whereas I'm a bit of a Neanderthal. I don't care about all that kind of stuff. So we go there with friends. So there's usually a group of us. And what we do is we have the laptop set up so that we have flight radar. There's a ship radar as well. So if you look overlooking the North Sea, you can see where all the boats are and stuff like that. And we also have one where you can point your phone and it will basically show you what planets are in the sky and it will name them for you and stuff like that. So we have all these different apps, and we put them up at the sky, and we sit there around the campfire, and if anything flies over, we check the apps, and if it's not on the apps, obviously, then it's something that we can't quite explain. And I remember at one point we saw a red light off the North Sea, which was dancing about, and that was interesting to me because when we put the astronomy app on, it was Mars. But because your eyes are, obviously I was getting tired, my eyes were moving, and that slight movement was making it look like this red dot was flying about. So that was interesting because it shows to me how easy misidentification can be. But at one point we saw these two balls of, I wouldn't say there was light, I would say they were like glass spheres. And they flew over together and they flew out towards the North Sea. And we all saw them. We looked up overhead and we saw them fly over. And that happened 2 nights in a row. We saw them and they didn't appear on any apps. They wasn't astronomical. There wasn't satellites. There wasn't planes. Just couldn't explain them. And again, there was just a great kind of serene feeling in the camp. There was no excitement or screaming or jumping about. It was just more like, what the hell is that? And we all sat there for quite a late hour discussing it. No one was drinking, there was no drugs or anything like that. So I just can't quite explain that.
So apart from the UFO experiences, you've had any other paranormal type experiences as well?
Yeah, well, this where I am right now, this is we moved in here when my 2 eldest were just babies. They were quite young. And I was born on this street. I lived 4 doors away. I lived on the street all my life, but I never knew the history of this property. And we moved in, and within the space of a week, my eldest would wake up in the night and he would shout at me, and I would run into his room and he'd say to me, "There's a man stood at the door." And there's no one there, So I used to say, "It's just a bad dream. It's night terrors." And one night he said he had a stick and he was banging it in his hand. And then my daughter would wake up and she would say to me, "Where's the old lady that sings songs to us and reads us stories and stuff like that?" And I was like, "There's no old lady in the house." Then one night my eldest woke up again and he was screaming, and I went into his room and I hugged him, and he put his head on my shoulder and he whispered in my ear, and he came in real close and he said, "It's behind you." So yeah, pooed myself a little bit, turned round, there was no one there. But then my wife was like, "Go and research the history of the property, go and have a look at the history of the house." So I went away, and in the archives there's a big folder called the Hull Times Index, and it said murder on 7th Street, which is my street. So I just thought I'll print that off because it'll be interesting with the neighbours to have a bit of a conversation about this, and I printed it off, and a man had basically killed a woman, and I went through all these archives and printed off about 20 newspaper reports. I remember sat in the cafe having a hot chocolate, and when I went through it, the address was my house. And basically what had happened was on April 1st, 1945, Fred Watson, who was a fitter, had got his axe and he put it through Mrs. Garbutt's head 6 times in the room that's just behind me.
Wow.
It then dragged their body into this room and switched on the gas taps. When that failed, he took a rusty knife and tried to cut his wrists. He was arrested. He was sent to the hospital on Beverly Road, but he escaped and ran into the town centre, and the police station was there. So they just ran out and arrested him. He was sent to the police court. He was deemed insane, and when they sent him to the asylum, he killed himself. So we had a death, well, quite a brutal murder, and also a suicide linked to the property. And I presented this to my wife, and she was like, well, why has she got a lodger? Why is she on her own? Where's her husband? So I went back to the archives, went further back in time. In 1929, Ernest Garbutt, who was the owner of the house, he left via that door, was never seen alive again. They pulled his body out the Humber near Grimsby. It looked like he'd been beaten up and thrown in. So potentially I've got a suspicious death, a murder, and a suicide linked to the property. So I contacted my local church. They contacted the Diocese of York. They sent a priest round to come and perform a blessing. And he walked in the house. He said, "Don't tell me anything about your property." And he walked to the bottom of the stairs. He said, "There's a man at the top of the stairs with an axe in his hand, and he wants to kill you and your family." So I swore a little bit, but I basically said that he can go. And he performed a blessing and got rid. He said, "There's a lady in the house and she's real protective over your family. She loves the house. She likes being here." And I said, if she wants to, she can stay. So every year on April 1st, we light a candle. Hello. Every year on April 1st, we light a candle in honour, in memory. So it's the cat. It's
yes,
glowing eyes.
Yeah. Because this is an audio only podcast. What just happened there is over Mike's. So in Mike's room, it's quite dark, and he's wearing a dark top, and all of a sudden, over his shoulder, these 2 eyes just appeared that didn't look like human eyes. Fucking, that was your cat, I hope. And
yeah.
oh my god!
But yeah,
Jesus.
So we he performed a blessing. Mrs. Garbutt, she's still here, bless her. We do get the occasional noise, and sometimes you'll hear singing and stuff like that. But I mean, I don't know if you can see it, but the newspaper reports, you'll see there.
Yeah.
Murder charge in Hull. And I got all the reports from the archives, and there's Mr. Garbutt. He's the guy that went missing. And then where is it? That one there's actually got the address of the property on. So I managed to build up an archive of this poor lady. And every year on April 1st, in honour of her, we light a candle and we talk about her and remember her. But it's not like, when you hear these stories of people getting dragged about, and it's not like that. It's not like a Hollywood film. You just get the occasional little bit of activity, the occasional shadow and things. It's not threatening. It's not evil or anything. And the cat seemed quite chilled out in here anyway. So I mean, surely that's a good sign.
Not after I just seen your cat. Yeah. So animals tend to react a lot to unknown entities or invisible things in rooms. So yeah. So if the cat's quite chilled, and that's got to be a good thing.
Yeah.
Does your wife believe in sort of this stuff or have an interest?
She believes, but she's not really. She's not really interested. She has been. I've took her on investigations and stuff like that before. I've took her on ghost walks and stuff. She's quite fearless. In the old days, we'd go to cemeteries and stuff like that, and she'd just go off on her own. She would go in. For years, I worked in a number of different allegedly haunted buildings, and she would just go off, and I'd just leave her to it. She's quite sensitive, so she'd get in some areas she'd get quite angry, so I'd have to kind of move her out. I've got to stand outside a minute, and she's quite fearless with stuff like that. So we I mean, we've not done anything together in that sort of respect for ages. But back in the day, she used to go all over with me and stuff. And whereas now it's to where it's more of a job for me. You know, so she doesn't really come along that much. Or I tried to get her involved. We've filmed a lot of documentaries and stuff, and I've said to her, come along and meet the crew, and we'll go for lunch together and stuff like that. So sometimes she would come along, whereas now it's more she does her thing, I do my thing. You know, so it's.
What about your kids? Have they sort of followed your interest or passion since like now they've got older?
Oh, the kids have, yeah. I remember coming downstairs one night and I could hear like screaming from the TV, and I walked in. They were watching one of the paranormal shows from America and stuff, and it was really nice to see that they were kind of interested in that. My daughter's really big on witchcraft and spiritualism, and she loves things like crystals and stones and stuff like that. Whereas my teenage son is more scientific. Back again. So my teenage boy is really scientific. He's got his head switched on, and he looks more at like the science side, which is really funny because there was a story earlier on about a signal from space. You know, I would wind him up and say, "Well, how do you explain that? Can you explain that to me?" And we'd have these conversations then about science and stuff. So it's kind of the same route that me and my dad took. You know, and I always say to them, don't believe everything you read on the internet. Go and do your own research, because in Hull, it's a prime example. We get people going to the newspaper saying this building's haunted and it was this, that, and the other, and they make up the history of it, and they make up stories of hauntings and stuff like that. And I always say to the kids, go and do your own research and make up your own maps. Don't just follow the party line and believe it, because you become blinkered, you know, and you're not getting the full picture.
So you mentioned TV paranormal shows then, and I believe that you were involved in Most Haunted.
Yeah,
at some point. How did that come about?
So I was working at a venue, and I used to run tours of the venue, and Yvette and Carl had come on a tour, and we really hit it off. And they sort of said, if we come back and film, would you mind being on the show? And I said, no, of course not. So they came back to Hull. They called me up and said, we're coming back. Will you make yourself available? And I remember it was a week before Christmas. It was freezing. The venue didn't have heating. It was such a cold night. And they came down and we filmed pretty much all night. They was there for many, many hours. And it was a really good night. And I remember at the end of the evening, they had a massive wooden Ouija board. It was autographed by loads of famous people. I'm talking TV people, musicians, and they left it at the venue by accident. So I looked after it and kept it safe. And they came back to do a Most Haunted experience at the venue. And I sort of said, I've got your property, and I've been looking after it for so long. And I handed it over to Carl. And I think at that point he realised then that I was a stand-up guy. You know, I could have had that on eBay. And they basically, I sort of said to him, I'm a bit cocky, I'm a bit cheeky. I believe that if you don't grasp, you don't get anything. So I just sort of said to him, if you've got any more work, give us a shout. And it was just a cheeky little throwaway comment. And about 4 months later, I was at the site of a World War II murder. I was taking photographs for a book. And my phone went, and it was the production team from Antics Productions. And they was like, we're making Most Haunted live. It's coming back. It's the first time it's been on TV for like a decade. Do you want to come on board and be the historian? I was like, shit, yeah. You know, I'm not gonna turn down an opportunity like that. And it was wonderful. They sort of said, do you want to come and work in the studio? You'll be working with Rylan from the X Factor. You'll be sharing screen time with him. You'll get to meet Paul O'Grady. We'll take care of all your food. And it sounds really super glamorous. And when we got there, it was filmed on the back of a lorry. But it was such an experience and so much fun. And nobody knew I was doing it. It was one of the best kept secrets that I've ever had. It was only on the night of the show, an hour before, a photograph of me on set leaked on social media. and people were sort of like, "Is that you?" And I was trying to ignore everybody. And I remember my wife was at home and she was taking care of my social media. And at 9 o'clock when it came on that I was there, social media just went crazy. We filmed it at 30 East Drive, the live event. It was really popular, and we had a really, really good night. Thoroughly enjoyed it. Loved working with them. They're like a family, So when you get on set, they come over and they hug you and they make you feel welcome, and that really helps. You're making a show like that where literally anything could happen, and it's just nice. They put you at ease. And then that led to an appearance on Paranormal Lockdown, where I got to work with Nick Groff and Katrina Weidman. And that again was the show was filmed at 30 East Drive, but I shot all my scenes during the day at a place called All Saints Church in Pontefract. And it was lovely because up until that point, all the paranormal stuff had been in the dark. It had been during winter. It had been when it was cold and wet. And, when you're on TV and they say you wear a suit and tie and it's freezing. So it was nice to be out in the sunshine and be able to wear your shades and just chill out. And Nick Groff is just one of the nicest guys I've ever met. He's just so down to earth, so funny. We spent a lot of our time just laughing and giggling and got into trouble a lot from the producer, because we were just winding each other up and giggling and just daft little throwaway comments, that would just make us all crack up and start laughing, and that was really nice to work on that. I also did a show called Ouija Dicing with Death, which was filmed at 39 Degree Street in Hull, and that was with Paranormal Troop. And then that led to other shows as well. I worked on a Jack the Ripper show. I worked on a couple of Travel Channel shows, Killer Neighbours, World War II Treasure Hunters. I did Infinite Monkey Cage recently, which was about UFOs. That's on the BBC iPlayer. So there's been quite a lot, and it's quite a broad spectrum of different projects in different kind of fields. But they're all wonderful.
Cool.
And you have so much fun filming them. When the cameras come on, you're all serious, and you've got your game face on, and you've got a job to do. But behind the scenes, to keep the mood, because most of these shows you're filming all night, so there are times when your energy levels start dipping. There's times when you think, what the hell am I doing? So there is a lot of, when we're not filming, there's a lot of kind of people telling jokes, people winding each other up, and that's nice because it just makes the night pass so much easier, especially when it's bloody freezing cold and you're trying to get warm, and it just takes your mind off it all, really.
That Most Haunted at 30 East Drive, there was some quite intense activity happened there. There was a knife appeared and got stuck in the sofa in the living room. Did you get to experience anything that happened in that house that night? Because obviously, so I've been to 30 East Drive and got nowhere near the level of activity that they did on that particular live broadcast. And I know there's some things on social media about that night as well that happened. But I'm just interested to know your thoughts on 30 East Drive, because it is quite a renowned property.
Yeah, I've investigated it 6 times. My job was to sit outside in the studio. My role in the run up to the production was to research it. Now, what I did when I researched 30 East Drive, it's quite easy to go and pick up Colin Wilson's book, Poltergeist, and things like that. It's quite easy to go over everything that's been written previously. What's more difficult is to go into the archives and research it, and that's what I did. I basically went into the archives across Yorkshire and researched the history of the house. I researched the people that had lived in there. I researched the genealogy side of it all. I researched the history of the land. And there's a couple of things that I never found. First of all, I never found any evidence of a black monk. I never found any evidence of an execution or a drowning or a murder of a black monk. I also, on the site, it's claimed that there's that the house was built on the watercourse where the monk was drowned. It was built on a well where he was thrown in. There's no evidence of that. None of the historical maps show a watercourse going across where 30 East Drive is located. None of the historical maps show a well or anything like that. The execution site in Pontefract is well marked out on all the maps. The historical documents show where the executions took place, and it was closer to the town centre, closer to the castle in Pontefract than it was to 30 East Drive. But what people fail to look into, the area that 30 East Drive is built on is known as Checkerfield. And just across the road from 30 East Drive, if you walk towards the school, there's a big empty field and there's a memorial there. And that memorial is for the Battle of Checkerfield, which was one of the bloodiest battles of the English Civil War. So the house is built on the site of one of the bloodiest battles of the English Civil War. But instead of researching the real history, we have these kind of made up stories of black monks and things like that. And you find that a lot in the paranormal. I find that a lot of venues where people will come up with like a fake history and a fake narrative. And when you go and research the truth, it's equally ghastly and gory and things like that. But it's not the same as what people are making out. And I've discovered that a lot. You know, we have in Hull, we have 39 Degree Street, which was for quite some time, it was billed as the most haunted house in Great Britain. And when it came out that it was haunted, I was working freelance with the Hull Daily Mail. And I was basically asked to look into the history of the property. And I spoke to one of the guys that was doing an event there. And he basically said it was a morgue, it was a mortuary, it was a funeral parlour, there were deaths, there were murders, there were suicides. It was a hostel, 20 children were killed in there, and they've tried to research it and they've hit a brick wall. I went to the Hull History Centre, and within the space of half a day, I had researched it from when it was built up to the present day. I'd gone through the census, the Burgess rolls, the electoral rolls, the polling books, the post office books, birth, marriage and death records, all Daily Mail archives. It was actually a removal company that had it called Hardacres. Nothing to do with it being a morgue, a mortuary, a funeral parlour. There was no deaths and murders. There was no suicides. It wasn't a hostel. There was 20 kids were not killed in that property. But what was quite interesting, one of the stories was the last owner that had it. She was dragged out of bed and held against the wall. And they called the police, and the police turned up. And when they came in the property, activity was that rife. The police fled from the property. So through the electoral roll and using social media, I tracked down the last owner that had the property. I sent her an inbox on Facebook, and she replied and said it's all a load of codswallop. And she basically said that she wasn't pulled out of bed, she wasn't held against the wall, she never rang the police. She said it was a lovely family home. But how do you confirm her story? So then I sent a Freedom of Information request to Humberside Police, and they sent one back saying we've never been to the property or anything like that. So they confirmed her story, and it was just really interesting how these stories have developed, and people still fall for them. You know, people still get hoodwinked, and you know, there's a saying, a fool and his money are easily parted, and in the paranormal, that is so true.
Yeah, it's quite a wild west at times, the paranormal ones, certainly on social media. But nothing happening is not quite as sexy and commercial as this black monk, this ominous figure, or 20 kids killed in a hostel, or it's not quite as fantastical as that. And I'm sure it wouldn't sell quite as many tickets, would it? But it's interesting. So when you've been at 30 East Drive, did you experience any activity?
A couple of times, yes. On one occasion, the boiler appeared to have packed up, and there was a strange smell coming from the boiler. Now, that night, everyone felt sick. There was like just this great wave of nausea, and I sort of pointed out that maybe it's the smell of the boiler was quite unpleasant. There was instances where we'd put marbles down in the room, and we'd gone for a walk and come back, and the marbles had moved and stuff like that. Trigger objects and stuff being pushed down the stairs and things. But it was always sort of hit and miss. Some nights there would be a lot of activity, and other nights there would be nothing. And occasionally you'd get voices on the recorders where you wasn't sure if it was inside the property or else, because it's a busy housing estate.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of the power of suggestion as well. There's a lot of people have heard so much about the place, and there's a lot of people that live around there that are quite willing to tell you a few stories for a couple of quid. And, so there was all that sort of thing as well going on. So yeah, I mean, I've not been back since Most Haunted Live. You see, when we did Paranormal Lockdown, my scenes were shot elsewhere, so I didn't have to go back to the property because they had it locked down, basically. So, but I've not been back since.
Going back a little bit to the Most Haunted Live. Now, as I've actually got somebody that I can speak to that was there that night. There is footage and of Carl being pulled up the stairs or something happening to him, and there's a lot of footage going around that seems to show a rope pulling him up. And I just wondered if you don't have to comment on what happened around that instant, if you're aware of it happening at the time.
Definitely. So what you guys don't see when you're filming a TV show, I've not actually watched the full show back, but I do know at the beginning they did some outside filming just to sort of introduce everyone to the production village. All the camera crew have, I believe they have 3 cables. They have the main cable connected to the camera. They have an audio cable that connects to the microphones. Then they have a spare cable which connects just in case one of the other 2 pulls out. The cables go in a loop, and they stick them through the belt holes on their jeans. Yeah. And the idea is that then if they have to run, the cables don't trail behind them. The cables are connected to the belt buckle. So it gives the impression that you've got a rope behind you, but it's not. It's the fact that you've got all these cables all strung together. When we were filming, we were told it was quite abrupt actually. We were warned not to stand on the cables because it would pull the cameraman. Especially if the cameraman was running towards the house. If the cameraman was running towards the house and we stood on the cable, he would either pull us over or we would pull him over. And obviously because they're carrying these big cameras. So we got that drilled into our heads. There was also a segment where they had all these cables run under the road. And to do that, they had this big plastic kind of, so if you had to drive a vehicle over, it would go over the cables. So all those cables were under there, and we were told that we couldn't stand on this because if we went on top of this, it could cut off the broadcasting. So we had this briefing: stay away from the cables, don't go near the cables. The cables are real temperamental. So later on, when he's filming, he's got these cables attached to him, and I think a lot of people that was viewing it thought that was a rope, but from our perspective, there was no one upstairs. All the crew was downstairs. Carl was sat on the stairs by himself. So there was no one that could have pulled him up there. So, and we saw that because outside where you've got the studio, you've got multiple cameras. And you, the viewer at home, are only seeing one camera, the one that's shown on your TV. You're not seeing everyone else just sat there bored, or they're outside having a cup of tea while they're filming in there on their own. So you sort of only get one perspective. And I remember at the time as well, I think Carl put a video on trying to explain the cables and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a bit of a pain in the backside really, because there's moments where you need to go to the toilet and you've got to make it from one side of the production village to the other while they're filming. So you've got to stay out the way of the camera, but also as well, you've got to be, I mean, it was dark and you've got to be aware that if you stand on this, you could potentially, some poor cameraman could end up falling on his ass with a camera, all because you needed to run to the toilet. So it was very, all the cables and stuff were trailing all over the place. And they was just trying to keep everything together. But yeah, I remember it well. I remember watching it.
So as far as you're concerned, that is a legit moment.
Yeah, definitely. And I've known Carl for years.
Yeah.
If you ever met him in person, he's so passionate about the paranormal. The first time I met him, he was, because when you see people on TV, you just think, oh, they're going to go to that place, they're going to do a bit of research first, they're going to film, and then that'll be it. They won't talk about it again. And he's so passionate, and he's one of them who can just case studies. He could just say, right, this happened there and that happened here, and and you can have really in-depth conversations with him about venues and stuff like that, where he will know about the history and he'll know the activity that's happened there and stuff. I was warned before I worked with them. People had said to me, just keep an eye. So I was like a hawk watching them, and I never saw any evidence whatsoever that they ever created any fake activity or any fraudulent activity or anything like that. I was never paid for my work, what I did on Most Haunted. So no one can come and say, well, they paid you. I waived my fee to be on the show, purely because I wanted to do it to be able to say in the future, that's what I've done. All this work that I'm doing is to leave a legacy behind for my kids when I'm gone. I've still technically got a heart condition, and I know that one day eventually, it's going to pack up and that'll be it really. So all the work I do is so that one day my kids can look back and say that's what my dad did. And just working on shows like that is just part of that journey. I was really blessed to be able to work on the show, and I still keep in touch with Yvette and Carl, and I was just chatting to Nick Groff the other day. Still talk to a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, and they're so down to earth and lovely. I remember Yvette came to Hull. We were speaking at a conference together in the city, and Yvette was talking on the Friday, and I was talking on the Saturday. And Yvette had basically, she was doing a Q&A, and she was in this big room filled with hundreds of people, and I sort of came in quite late because they were giving free cocktails and stuff, so I had a few drinks, and I was sat in the back. And she said, she talked about Most Haunted, she talked about her books, because she's writing now a lot of fiction, and she was talking about that. And then she opened it up to questions, and I just sort of sat at the back out of the view and just got the microphone and said, who was the greatest historian that you've ever worked with? She recognised me straight away and started laughing. And she's just so nice, she was really lovely. And the next day she came back and we sat and had a conversation, and we still talk a lot. But it's just they really are genuinely interested in what they do. And you find that a lot. I mean, when I met Nick Roth and Katrina Weidman on Paranormal Lockdown, they were so knowledgeable about what they were doing and the locations they'd visited, and they were interested in things like Jack the Ripper and the Beast of Barmston Drain. So they were talking about stuff like that and questioning me on things like that. And it's lovely when you meet people like that, because yourself, if you're passionate about it, it's because you're genuinely interested, and it was wonderful to be able to talk to them. Because I've met people before that are only interested in the money. They don't care about the history of the venue. They don't care about what goes on. They're just interested in putting bums on seats, making a bit of money, then moving on to the next venue. So it's nice to meet people that are really passionate and interested, and yeah, lovely.
Yeah, I don't doubt their passion for it, because you wouldn't be able to do it for that long, I don't think, with that. And so no, I appreciate your openness on that answer, because I know I would have kicked myself if I hadn't asked you about that. I really would have after this. But no, cool, appreciate that, thank you.
Is there anywhere that you've investigated where you've sort of had a lot of stuff happening and you think this is like there's something going on here?
Oh yeah, one of my favourite venues is Royal Station Hotel in Hull. I remember when I first started out, that was one of the first venues I contacted, because it has such a rich history of, there was a couple of suicides in there that were quite ghastly. It was linked to 10 different Jack the Ripper suspects. It was linked to the Yorkshire Ripper manhunt. So you've got kind of a dark history already. And I'd heard stories about it being haunted from various people that had worked there. And I remember I got in touch with them, and it was during, they were building St. Stephen's shopping centre next door. So they were pile driving. So occupancy rates had dropped dramatically. And they were just eager to get people in the door. So I called them up and said, can I come and spend the night? And this is why. And the guy I spoke to at the time was called Ray, and he was the duty manager. And he was like, I'm really interested in this kind of stuff. Should we just go around together? So every Friday night I would go in with my gear and we would just go around the hotel together. I remember one night we were in the basement. Stuff was moving about in the basement, and we were on our own. I remember another night we were in the reception, and we were sat with. Back then, they used to have like a night watchman. They'd have the doorman. They would have a male receptionist. They would have like a guy who makes all the tea and coffee for guests and stuff. And then there was myself and Ray, all big strapping burly lads, and we're all sat round having a cup of tea in the middle of the night. And this boy just appeared, and my first thought was this kid's broken. And I said to Ray, "Does he work here?" And we all looked over, and he had like a little blue hat on, and he had his hand in his jacket pocket. And Ray looked over and he said, "No, he don't work here." And Ray got up, and he's a big strapping lad, does kickboxing, and Ray sort of shouted, "Oh, the bloody hell are you?" And this kid ran and legged it. So we all chased him, all these big strapping lads. And he ran down next to the restaurant in there, which goes to a brick wall. And he ran through the brick wall. And I remember all of us just stopped dead in our tracks, like, what the hell just happened? And even now, hairs on back of my neck are going. I remember looking at all these other lads, and they were like, "For the rest of the night, we don't split up. For the rest of the night, we stick together." And that night, we moved as a unit. We did not leave each other. On one occasion, I took a member of staff into the basement, and he, at the end of it's like a really long corridor. He just basically started screaming and crying. And I went up to him and said, "What's the matter?" And he said, "Oh, I've just seen the Slender Man." Well, the Slender Man is a fictional character. And I said, "Describe him." And he said, "Well, he had a big long coat on and a top hat." And well, that to me is a Victorian gent. And I took him back upstairs to the reception. He ordered a double. He ordered a taxi. He handed his keys in, and he left his job that night. And that is a place that I can just go time and time again. I've spent a lot of my nights in there, a lot of evenings with friends and various paranormal groups. I've took psychics, mediums. I even took Reverend Peter Laws, who works for 14 Times. Reverend Peter Laws was writing a book called The Frighteners. And he came to Hull, and he said to me, "Will you take me to the hotel, and we'll go and do an investigation?" So we've been in there as well. Yeah, we've had some great nights in there. I mean, overall, I think I've investigated that place now about 30 times, and it's never disappointed. I've always had really good activity in there. At the minute, it's all closed up because it's used for immigration services. So people that come into Britain are housed in there at the minute. So we can't get in there for investigations or anything, which is a real shame. But there's so much history to that building. It's wonderful.
Welcome to Britain. We're just going to put you in this massively haunted house. hope you like it.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's what we've got left. You're going to have to don't follow the boy. That's, oh my God, I don't know how I would cope seeing what you would think it would be like a solid human running through a wall. That's quite an intense experience, I can imagine. But...
yeah, I mean, it's weird because, like I said, I had a heart condition for years, but doing stuff like that, it relaxes me. So I don't get kind of frightened, or I'm not scared by it all. I'm more relaxed. And people find that weird, but I said to them, like, it's my hobby, it's my passion, it's what I'm interested in. So I don't feel worried or scared about going around haunted buildings on my own and stuff like that. I'm quite relaxed doing it. And I always have a rule of thumb. I always say to people at the beginning of the night, I'm very rarely worried about stuff, but if you do see me running, try and keep up, because then it is great, and it's great because it breaks the tension a little bit, and I always find that laughing on investigations really helps people. And I've had stuff where I remember one night we were doing an investigation, and the property was a Victorian building, and the ceiling was partly made of glass. And I remember this lady turned up, and she was really, really negative. And she basically said, "I've done all this stuff before. It's crap. It's a money maker. I don't believe in it." But she said, "I've paid my money, so I'm here just to crack on." And I just thought, well, why pay your money? Why just not stay at home and watch Coronation Street or whatever? And 10 minutes later, she came running downstairs, and she was screaming, and she was crying, and she was shaking. And I calmed her down. I got her a cup of tea, and I said, "What's the matter?" And she said, "I've just seen a shadow figure run across the wall upstairs." And she was terrified. And I said, "Let's go back. Let's go and have a look and investigate." And she was like, "No, I don't want to." And I said, "Come on, because I want you to see what what it is. I want to see what it is, but I don't want you to be scared by it because I don't want you to go home and be terrified. The whole point of a paranormal investigation is to investigate. So I took her back upstairs to this room. We both stood there, and with that, two shadows come running across the wall. And I remember she grabbed my arm and she went to run, and I pulled her back and said, "We don't run, we stay. Like whatever it is, we face this, because if you run now, you will never come back." So we stood there, and it happened again, and I could feel her; she was shaking. And I said, like, by then I figured out what it is. I said, so every time a car passes, the lights shine up on the glass ceiling, and this is our reflection. This is our shadows running across the wall. Like the legs never moved, so it was just a stick man. So I said to her, like, let's wait again. And sure enough, a car came by. The figures moved across the wall, and I just felt her body just. And she said, "I feel so stupid." And she thanked me. And I said to her, like, if you would have gone home, you would have been convinced this place is one of the most scariest places you've ever been in. I said, always don't run, don't scream, don't panic, stand your ground and just think about the other factors that it could be that's causing this, these hauntings or this activity. And at the end of the night, she came over and she said, "I can't thank you enough." She said, "It was wonderful." She said, "I've had a really good night." And, and she said, "I'll be back for more." So that was really nice to experience that. On another occasion, there was a group we took to the Guildhall in Hull. And I remember this kid turned up and he was covered in bling. And he basically said, "I don't believe in all this, but my girlfriend does, so I'm just here with my girlfriend," sort of thing. And we were in the Lord Mayor's chambers. And when you sit on the Lord Mayor's chair, it feels like you shouldn't be there. Now, I'm not a psychic, I'm not a medium, but it just feels to me like that's meant for the Lord Mayor. It's not meant for me, it's meant for the Lord Mayor. So I said to this kid, "Come and sit here and see what you think." And he sat there and straight away went, "Oh, it feels like I shouldn't be here." So, well, why's that then? If you don't believe in any of this, why is that? And he was trying to rationalise it. So I said, "Look, why don't you ask out for something to happen to you?" So he sort of sat there and said, "If you're here, come and affect me." And I just heard him shout, "What was that?" And he just threw his hands in the air. And I just felt little shards of glass flying everywhere. And his watch, really nice watch, it just exploded on his hand. There was glass all over. And he got up and he ran. And over the spirit box, there was just a real demonic voice, I said it was an elderly man just laughing. And then the words, he's running. And he was like, "What the hell? Like, how is that possible?" And he went downstairs. I got him a cup of tea. He was shaking. I had to go back upstairs because if you think about it, this is the Lord Mayor's chairs now covered in glass. So I had to go back in that room by myself with a dustpan and brush and make sure all the glass was cleaned up. And I remember going back downstairs and saying, "Are you all right?" And he said, "My mind's blown." He said, "I'm, it really has." And I couldn't explain what had just happened. And I remember that night, like usually when you get home, it's like 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I remember all night he was messaging me on Facebook, like it just totally changed his outlook on life. And he was like, "I really do believe now there's something else out there." And I remember his partner messaging me like, "He's still away. He won't go to this." Just sat there like going over everything in his head. And I was like, "But that is wonderful, and because she's always enjoyed it, and it was nice that now that they can enjoy that together and go and investigate together and stuff like that." Yeah, weird experiences like that just make me want to do it all the more.
So you've investigated, obviously, UFOs we've talked about, ghosts and hauntings we've talked about. You've done quite a lot on cryptids and that sort of thing as well. Do you think all these different areas of the paranormal are linked? Are they all the same thing? Or are they like separate sort of UFOs, ghosts, or something completely different? What do you think about sort of the link between all the different?
Years and years ago, I would have probably said they were all separate. However, through my research, I've noticed that you have sort of these areas where you get a lot of UFO sightings, you get a lot of ghost sightings. I know Barmston Drain, when we did the Beast of Barmston Drain story, people were coming forward with stories from that little stretch, talking about ghosts. They were talking about black-eyed ghost kids. They were talking about UFO sightings. So that was really interesting that all that was in one area. The Humber, for example, I'd written an article about the Humber monster, but a lot of the UFO sightings in the National Archives that were from the MOD files came from the Humber. corridor. So people were seeing stuff over the Humber that they couldn't explain. And then along the banks of the Humber, people were seeing ghostly monks in procession and stuff like that. So you do find that there's little areas where all this stuff seems to be concentrated. Hull is weird because we have the outlying villages. We get a lot of big black cat sightings, and these have been going on for years. So when you go out to these areas and you say, I always try and ask questions that are not leading. So instead of going and saying, have you ever seen a big cat, or have you ever seen a UFO, I'll always say, have you ever experienced anything unusual? And that way you open up the doors for everything, and people come forward with ghost stories and cryptids and all sorts, and it's wonderful because you get all these different angles. And at the minute, a big area of my research is into witches and witchcraft. So we recently did a road trip through North Yorkshire, and the idea was we were going to visit areas where witchcraft was associated with, areas that were associated with these holy wells, where people would go and pray to these wells, and areas associated with quirky ecclesiastical sites. So Lastingham Church, for example, which has a crypt in the basement and things like that. And I remember at one point we just pulled up in a random village because they had a maypole, and I just thought, what a wonderful thing to take a picture of. And my friend was obsessed with this beautiful cottage that he'd seen. He's an artist, and he wanted to take pictures of this cottage so that he could go home and draw it. And the owner of the cottage came out and sort of said, "Well, can I help you guys? Because we do look a bit shifty." And we got chatting to him and just said we were on a road trip looking at the weird and unusual. And he just sort of said to us, just watch out for the witches. He said the witchcraft is rife around here. And it was just wonderful because, like, most people would turn around and go home at that point. But we was like, fantastic. This is just the kind of thing we need, really. And it was wonderful. We went to all these, and we never found anything witchcraft related or anything like that. But it was just nice to go and visit the sites, and really, really lovely.
Going back to the question, it's all linked. Do you think now your opinion's changed once you've been doing all the research? Would you have a theory as to what causes these sightings, or is there anything that can explain why there's all these different things happening?
It's weird to explain it because obviously this is audio, so we're going to have to be. So my thing was, I'm going to draw you a really rough diagram. So you can see I've got a bit of paper there with a dot and a circle, and they're miles away from each other. But if we go like that and fold it and hold it up against the light, the dot and the circle intersect. They're in the same point. And I believe we're in areas where every now and again the dot and the circle intersect, and that's when people are experiencing these UFOs and various other paranormal activity. A lot of people that come to me say when they see stuff, they're kind of like, it's peaceful and serene. They don't panic, and the amount of people that say that, it sounds like everything goes quiet, and you see this weird stuff. So I think it's kind of just like I don't know if it's a warp in reality or glitch in the matrix or what, but I do think maybe that's why people are experiencing stuff. I think if the conditions are right, and I know people in the paranormal, people talk a lot about the stone tape theory and stuff like that, and how quartz crystal is capable of recording stuff, and that can explain some of the ghostly sightings and stuff like that. But then how do you explain like the UFOs? And I just think there's something there that we've not quite grasped. There's research going on all the time into wormholes and stuff like that, and dark matter, and how the visibility spectrum works, how we can only see so much and how we can only hear so much. Perhaps just that those brief moments in time, that the auditory, the visual, the spatial or whatever, just becomes so clear, and there's that clarity where we can see stuff for a brief glimpse, for a brief moment, and then it's gone again. And that's interesting for me because when we go on paranormal investigations, we have people come forward who, you'll take maybe 20 people into a room and a figure will appear in the corner of the room, but not everyone will see that. And that for me is interesting because why are only certain people seeing it and not everyone? And I see that, I get that a lot. And people say with UFOs, how come not everyone can see the UFO? how come only certain people saw it, and you know, things such as that. I think maybe when people are at a certain heightened state of consciousness, and you know, and they can maybe see more than other people, or I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out here, but there does seem to be sort of a correlation between, you know, from my research, I've written books on UFOs, cryptozoology, ghost sightings, and if you lay all the sightings on top of each other, it gives you a clear indication on these maps where these areas of high strangeness are. And that for me is quite compelling. It's quite interesting where you've got these big clusters of sightings.
Have you done any sort of research into ley lines? I know some people say that these areas sort of intersect ley lines because of whatever energy could be, and that's right there. Have you done any sort of research into that?
I have, yeah. We a few years ago, some friends and I, like a fellowship, if you will, we did the World's Triangle, which is it goes to Rudston. Now, Rudston Monolith is where 3 ley lines all intersect. There's a couple of local burial cases, which are ancient burial pathways, and then, of course, the Gypsy Race as well is in close proximity. And I just wanted to go and touch Rudston Monolith. And I remember I had my EMF detector, I had my compass, I did stories of compasses spinning wildly and EMF detectors going off. And I remember walking up to it, and I was live streaming as well on Facebook at the time, so all my followers could watch, and nothing happened. And I remember putting my hand on it, expecting sort of a jolt of electricity, and nothing happened. But the fact that all 4 of us got to go to be there was, to me, the real power of these places. It just, something about those areas just attracted us. And what was weird, I don't know if you know the story of the Gypsy Race, but according to the stories, the Gypsy Race is a water course, and depending upon its height, it basically signals whether or not the country is in peril. Apparently, when it drops, we suffer things like the war, World War I and World War II, and various plagues and choleras. And it's known as the Waters of Woe. So we wanted to go as explorers, and we wanted to see this. And one of the things that we wanted to do was to just dip our toes into the Waters of Woe, and just to see what would happen. And the day that we did it, I believe it was Peter Noakes, but the day we did it, one of the guys from Blue Peter died. So it was just like, whoa, did we do that? did our toe dipping exercise kill off a Blue Peter member? I don't know. Purely coincidental.
Maybe.
Yeah, great fun. I remember we went to look for funeral cases in the middle of the field, and it all looked the same to me. But my friend was adamant that he was stood in the middle of this ancient funeral pathway. And these are also like ley lines and stuff like that. But yeah, a few years ago, I was asked to look into ley lines across Hull. And we found several that cross through the city. So I've marked them out on a map, and I've been looking at things like what's been occurring along them clusters, and you know, the churches that are built along them and stuff like that, if anything's happened at those churches. But yeah, if you ever get the chance to go to Rudston, there's like 3 ley lines that all intersect with each other, where the church is and where the monolith is. And it's just fantastic. And inside the church, they've got a model of the area that shows you where the ley lines are. It shows you where the curses are, and all the standing stone, all that kind of stuff. And that's really, really cool. And there was, do you know, when you go to these kind of places and you meet the locals and stuff like that, and it always adds a little bit of flavour and character. There was a guy cutting the grass in the cemetery where the church is. So one of the lads went over to chat to him, and he was talking about local big cat sightings. He said there was a lot of big cat sightings in the area. He was talking about UFO sightings in the area. He said there'd been a lot of UFO sightings in the area. And he said they get a lot of witch, like covens, pagans, Wiccans, and the monolith itself, there's small holes in it. And we found offerings we found salt, we found money, so people that put money into the crevices and stuff like that. But the weirdest one, we found chopped red onion at the base of it, and we still can't explain that. I mean, garlic and stuff like that, you'd think would for protection, but red onion is more of it's kind of a flavour thing in salad for me. But yeah, we sort of said to the guy, like, is there a reason why there would be red onion scattered around? And he He was like, no idea. But yeah, it was a wonderful place to visit.
Well, definitely something to be said for these places. I love stone circles, and I've been to dozens around the country, especially up the Lake District. There's lots, and every time I go somewhere, I'm on these sites where it tells like he's got to climb over this farmer's field, park on here, walk half a mile that way to find this. Some of them can be tiny and just only a couple of markings, but obviously they've been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. There is something about just being in them places. It's just it's calming. It's definitely different energy that you can feel when you're there. I don't know what it is. It is just nice being there, like you say. It's just definitely good to go to these places and just be there. I think that's the thing.
Well, we went to Lastingham Church, and Lastingham Church has a crypt that's dedicated to a guy called Saint Sed, and the crypt dates back to 700 AD.
Wow.
It's also, I believe, a guy called Paul Devereux, who's written a number of books and articles on Earth mysteries and energies. He'd written that it was on several ley lines, and it was a highly charged area. And when people go down, the compasses start spinning round. And the day we went, it was packed full of tourists. And I had all my equipment sort of, it was in my pockets. And I had my spirit box in one ear. I had my EMF detector. I had my compass. And I was trying to work my way around quietly without getting in anyone's way and trying to pick up on these energies. And I got nothing. But at the same time, like you say, there was just that great sense of something special down there. It was quite serene. I remember at one point everybody just kind of left, and I went down there on my own and just sort of sat thinking, "Wow, what an amazing place!" And it was, what was weird. It was much colder than everywhere else. So when you breathed out, you could see your breath as you were breathing out. And on the way out of the church, a lady came up to us, and this group that were in there, they were really interested in it all. But we had the impression that they were only there for the architecture. And we got chatting to these people that were in there, and they were wonderful, and they were talking about like ley lines and stuff like that. And that was really nice, just to meet like-minded people on your adventure. And we'd heard rumours that the local pub was linked to the church. And we went in and spoke to the staff. And one of the staff members said it was, but one of the staff members said it wasn't. So that we're still undecided about that. I mean, why would a pub be linked to a church? It doesn't really make any sense. And then we also asked them about the local witches as well, because that was one of the places that we were warned, don't go to Lastingham because there's witches. So we went in the pub, ordered a drink, and then asked them straight out, where's all the witches at? And they denied that there were any witches. But if you think about it, I guess that's what a witch would do, wouldn't they? So still undecided about that one.
So you mentioned your books. You want to tell us a bit more about your books, where you can find them, and where our listeners can find more about you as well?
So I published 30 books. I don't know if you can see them because it's quite dark, but they are all on the shelf behind. They're currently unavailable. So my publisher had a bit of a fallout with Amazon last year, so all the books got pulled off display. So I've signed a contract to publish my own books later this year. So they will be back available, and they will be available on Amazon. They'll be just brand new I'm going to edit them all and put new content in and update them and stuff like that, and proofread them and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I don't know if you guys can see them because it's quite dark, but they are all there. So there's stuff on that one, for example, is East Yorkshire UFOs, and
a lot of information.
Quite a big one. But yeah, they're like that. They're all fully referenced with bibliographies and source lists and all that kind of stuff, because I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to that kind of thing. I want the reader to know where I've got the information from, so then they can go and fact check it if they need to and stuff like that. So yeah, they're all, when they were available, they were really popular. So it was a bit of an upset really when they had to come off sale, but hopefully later this year they're back on again. So, and at the minute I'm currently working, I think it's about book 60 that I'm writing at the minute. It's I write quite a lot. My current word count's about 200,000 words on my witch project, which is nearly finished. I was hoping to finish it at some point in the next couple of weeks.
Wow. So do you have a website or social media where we can find you?
Yeah, just look for Mike Covell on Facebook or Twitter. I do have a page for Amazing Hull Tours on Facebook, which is just Amazing Hull Tours. I also have an Instagram page, but I've no idea what that is because I'm quite new to that. And then my children have just introduced me to TikTok, but I've not posted anything on there because it gets on my nerves. So yeah, someone said to me you should do like local history, like little sound bites of local history on TikTok, but I've not figured out how to do it. You saw yourself tonight how bad I am with technology. So yeah, I'm a bit of a nightmare when it comes to stuff like that. But yeah, I can't even remember why I joined Instagram. I think it was because one of my kids had said to me, "You should be on Instagram," and I joined it, not really knowing what it was. And I just post occasionally, but people follow me and I follow them back. But yeah, I'm probably better known on Facebook and Twitter because I've been doing them for years, and I can do that quite easy without crashing stuff. And yeah, so.
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Mike, for chatting to us. Very interesting learning about your own life and your journey. It's been a fascinating journey to hear. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Thank you for having me.
Pursuit of the Paranormal with Ash and Greg.